Gone Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
8:03 is the time here on LBC. If you'd like to watch us over the next hour, you can do so on the LBC website, Facebook page, YouTube channel and Twitter feed, because I'm in the company of Layla Moran, Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abington. I think we've done at least 2 of these hours before, and there's all sorts of reasons why we wanted you to come in tonight. You know exactly what they are.
Lots been happening.
And we are going to give our listeners a chance to speak to you also during this hour, so we'll take some calls after 8:30. If you want to rack the calls up now, 0345 60 60 973 is the number to call. Let's start off with what happened in the election, because I got the distinct impression you weren't particularly comfortable with the direction of the Liberal Democrat campaign. I mean, you were very loyal and you didn't say so overtly, but reading between the lines, I thought she's not happy with this.
Well, I think a lot of us kind of, when we realised that there was all sorts that went wrong. And actually, I'm sure a lot of people are engaging in deep navel gazing in all sorts of different ways at the moment. So Christmas was a good time to reflect. And there are, I would say, 3 things that kind of went very badly wrong for us. One was out of our control, which was Jeremy Corbyn. In the last couple of weeks in particular, I started to hear not just Conservative voters who you would expect really distrusted Corbyn, but even some of my own voters who previously had voted for me, voted in the past for us perhaps locally quite recently, say, I can't vote for you because I'm concerned about Corbyn. And then you go a bit deeper. Why? We just don't trust him. We don't trust him on security. We don't trust him on other things. And you know, that's deeply disheartening to hear, because that's nothing to do with you. And you put it to one side and you go, well, you know, I'm not him, and I also Boris Johnson's not that brilliant. You love him? No, I don't trust him either. But for when they had to weigh that up, and with a third party nationally, even in a seat like Oxford West and Abingdon, where actually we're first, that plays into the conversation.
And I suspect that was a large reason why someone like Tom Brake lost his seat. He's been there since 1997, had clung on even in the really bad election in 2015, and yet this time he was swept aside. And I suspect because a lot of possibly slightly right of centre Liberal Democrats just thought we can't have Corbyn.
Yeah, and I remember it reminded me a lot of the 2015 general election, where you had that heartstring issue around Miliband and Alex Salmond, and it was sort of quite similar. And I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it to happen. So one of the criticisms I have of our own campaign is I think the tone with which we attacked Corbyn was, we needed to point out that we weren't about to go into coalition with him. Absolutely, we need to be clear with that. But the way you get over the fact that that's inevitably going to happen, which I could see was actually you don't antagonise the Labour voters in the seats that you need to win. And I think that was one of the things that perhaps we didn't get quite right. We should have absolutely distanced ourselves from the Labour Party. To this day, I will stand by the fact that I would never have propped that man up at all.
But to be fair, is what Jo Swinson said.
Which is what she'd said. But the tone was it sounded so heavy against Corbyn that then I had Labour voters saying to me, well, I can't vote for you because you have been so mean to Corbyn. It was like, well, actually, there was another way we could have done this. We could have distanced ourselves from it without antagonising those voters.
To coin a phrase, how many marks out of 10 would you give Jo Swinson's leadership?
I'm not doing it. Listen, Jo is a colleague, a friend.
Was a colleague.
Well, she's still in the Liberal Democrats, and I'm sure she will, you know, and I'm sure everyone's heart goes out to her. What happened to her on a personal level, even now, just makes me like, I just don't know what she must be feeling. And if she's listening, which she maybe isn't, but, you know, all the love. I actually think, given the fact that she had been in place for 4 months, she was still recruiting members of that team. I think she did an incredible job. And most of the reasons, I think, why this campaign went so badly wrong were out of our hands. But I'm not going to wash our hands from it. I think we did make mistakes. I've named one of them. And revoke, I think, was the other. Again, the framing of revoke, I think, went down incredibly badly.
2 pretty big mistakes, though. And I mean, I have to say, when that was announced, I thought that might be a masterstroke, because it really did put clear I was going to say yellow
water. That sounds gross.
No. Between you and the Labour Party, because their position was all over the place on Brexit, people knew exactly what your position was, but maybe you didn't quite need to go that far. Is that something that, as the campaign went on, you heard on the doorstep? That even from Liberal Democrat voters, they didn't like it?
Yes, absolutely. And my reflection on that, and I'd say this as someone who, frankly, was in rooms where this was being discussed, it felt pure. It felt honest. It was what we wanted to do. We had put out manifestos that said bollocks to Brexit. Our manifesto at the time said stop Brexit. And so it's a logical extension of that thought process that if you win a majority, you therefore do that by revoking Article 50. So I would struggle to say that we would have done something different at that point, because I think you ended up then in that weird Labour Party position of you're going to negotiate a deal and then put it back and campaign against it and that kind of thing. So,
and was there anyone in the room when you were having those discussions that said, hang on a minute, I'm not sure this is wise?
You've nailed it, Iain. This was the problem, in my view. Decisions are made when you have a diversity of good decisions, in my view, are made when you have a diversity of views in the room and everyone's given the space and the time to be able to properly engage with and listen without it being high stakes. I, after the fact, now speak to members who say, well, I just didn't feel that I could say something against it because it was being pushed so hard at conference. And we had some brilliant speeches from people who were representing communities that we should be able to be reaching out to, particularly in the north of England, places that actually vote Lib Dem on a local level. We are not just the urban elite. Actually, there are lots of places that vote Lib Dem. But they were saying, Southwest as well, our voters really are going to hate this. Please don't do this. We don't need to do this. The people's vote position is strong enough and people know where we stand and they know what we want. And I wonder how we can better make decisions.
What I'm really meaning is that your party has a federal policy committee. Mm-hmm. You have parliamentary group meetings with all the Liberal Democrat MPs. Are you on the policy committee?
I'm not.
So you wouldn't know what happened there, but you are in the parliamentary party meetings. Was there none of your colleagues? Did you ever put your hand up and say, I'm not sure about this one?
There was a couple of colleagues, I'm not going to name them because it's for them to say who they are, who did raise do we really need to do this? And the consensus at the time was that actually, and remember, this was off the back of, we just had this influx of new MPs, many of them from Change UK. There was this sort of corner of the market that we wanted to capitalise on, which was the Remainer market, the 6 million people who'd signed that revoke policy. This was all the things that were going in the back of our minds. And I still think there was actually, it's not necessarily the policy itself that hurt us, because and let me go on to explain, because obviously it did hurt us, but it was the framing of it. You'd have a conversation on the doorstep, revoke's undemocratic. Well, how is it undemocratic when it's during a general election and you'd only do it if we went from 20 to 326 seats? And the problem there was it sounded undemocratic because it sounded like you wouldn't allow the electorate to come to that conclusion themselves. What I think we should have done in the framing is said, every Lib Dem MP is another MP that will fight to stop Brexit. We'll do that with a people's vote at first, but if you, the electorates, put us in power, then we will stop Brexit. And by the way, that means revoking Article 50. So you do it the other way around, and suddenly that doesn't sound undemocratic, because it wasn't.
The problem was that we were all getting leaflets through our doors saying, introducing you to Jo Swinson, your next Prime Minister. And people laughed at that because they thought, well, how can they go from 20 MPs to 326? It's just not going to happen. So the whole revoke thing, if you got into power, it was kind of, you didn't need to have the debate, did you? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Stop Brexit stance was clear enough. Everyone knew we were the party of Stop Brexit. That's why we did so well in those European elections. And we probably could have avoided that particular policy.
I can't remember whether you as a party voted for the general election when it came to the... You did. I mean, in a way, you and the Labour Party, and I think the SNP, I think they voted for it as well. I mean, you're all to blame, aren't you, actually? Because you didn't have to have that election then.
I remember that conversation too, and that was a decision that I was much more on the fence on, because I was fairly pro the revoke policy at the time. I thought it would go down fairly well in Oxford, West and Abingdon. We got some blowback, but not too much. On that, there was a real split, actually. And we decided, though, it was the right thing because we were concerned that the withdrawal agreement had got through its second reading off the back of, I think it was 19 or so Labour votes. And we, desperately wanted, one way or another, a public vote on the deal. Now, we had come to the conclusion that without the full support of the Labour Party, which was still forthcoming at this point, they still hadn't quite got there, that we weren't going to get the people's vote in that parliament. We'd kind of given up, I'm afraid. And not because we didn't want it, but because we realised the numbers probably weren't there. And then we were facing the prospect of this withdrawal agreement getting through without the public having a say on that deal. And for its rights and wrongs, and a general election is a very imperfect way of deciding that question. At least the public had their say. Now, where we've ended up is quite interesting because we now have a situation where we've got a landslide Conservative majority off the back of an increase of their vote of 1.2%. And the majority of people actually in the country, by a narrow margin, I think it's something like 53%. I mean, there's a perverseness to what's happened, did actually vote for pro-People's Vote parties. So, I think we're now at the point.
That's quite a difficult one, though, isn't it? Because you know as well as I do that
not pro-Remain, I would say.
No, but in the referendum, 25% of Liberal Democrat voters voted Leave. So you can't just say, well, every single Conservative supported Brexit. I understand why you put that argument, but it's quite, if you actually drill down into it, it's not really very good.
No, and it doesn't always work that way. But I would perhaps we could concede that maybe the way that people voted isn't quite reflected in the landslide Conservative majority that we've got now.
But the fact is, you've got 11 MPs. Because of the parliamentary arithmetic, you're not going to have the influence that you did in the last parliament. You could actually make a difference with it because a lot of the votes were won or lost by 1, 2, 3 votes, weren't they? Well, that's right. We saw today the majority of 99.
Yeah.
It's a completely different political world now. The atmosphere has changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I think there was a sense of, and we didn't give up. Actually, I pushed 2 votes yesterday, one on Erasmus and one on level playing field. I feel that, and I should say, I'm very proud of some of our seats. Like I increased my majority by tenfold. We still have our own mandate. We've got our own values. We're going to be pushing for the things that we care about. But there was a general sense of giving up by some, particularly on the Labour ventures, was so empty. And I think while they're going through their leadership election, they are also engaged in deep navel gazing at the moment. Well,
you're about to go through a leadership election as well, which we will come on to, as you might have imagined, in just a moment. You're listening to LBC and with Layla Moran. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Clearance at John Lewis & Partners is now on, with up to 50% off selected lines across all your favourite brands. So if you've had your eye on something special, now's the time to make it yours. More of what you love for less. Clearance. Now on. Terms and conditions apply. See in-store or online for details.
The Dreams up to 50% off winter sale is now on. And until Tuesday, there's further reductions on a choice of beds and mattresses. And there's even free delivery. Don't miss out. Further reductions end Tuesday at Dreams. T's and C's and minimum spend applies.
Hello?
Sarah, Witchton Wolf. I understand a tenant was complaining about a problem at one of your properties. So we paid them a visit and you won't be hearing from them again.
What?
Direct Line dealt with the problem, Sarah. You bought landlord emergency with your policy and they sent someone around in 4 hours. Perfect.
Electrician, plumber, glazier, locksmith emergency response within 4 hours. Can your landlord insurance do that? Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. Optional add-on. Excludes Scottish Highlands and Islands. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Residential properties only. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
I'm Captain Obvious, and every day people book trips on Hotels.com that you will later hate like. A hate like is when you like Becky's picture of another waterfall even though you kind of hate it because she's there and you're on the train next to a mouth breather. Don't hate like Becky's trip. Book your own with Hotels.com. Hotels.com. Be there, do that.
Calling all hard-working minicab drivers. Are you the very best London has to offer? Yes? Then Greyhound Cars, one of South London's oldest and most progressive minicab companies, want to speak to you. Spend less time travelling to jobs and more time earning money. With a very busy day circuit, we have high demand and are now offering great bonuses and mileage rates for the very best drivers. You could pay as low as 10% commission. Start today at greyhoundcars.co.uk.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 18 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm talking to Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon. You can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on our YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. Layla, when Jo Swinson became leader, you slightly surprised a lot of people and said that you weren't going to stand. A lot of people think if you had stood then you would have won. Because both Ed Davey and Jo Swinson had served in the coalition government. You were seen as a sort of fresh face. Obviously, that was only, 6 months ago, and you're going to have to make that decision again.
I know.
Would you like to reveal live on LBC what that decision is going to be?
I'm sorry, Iain. I know you desperately want me to. Look, here's where I am. I am seriously considering it. It's the kind of thing that I did consider before, but there was a couple of huge barriers, one of which is gone, which is that I had a tiny majority in Oxford West and Abingdon. It was only 816, now it's nearly 9,000, over 50% of the vote. I'm proud to say the best ever result for any party or candidate. And so that to me was, a sign from the constituency that we're doing a good job, and that's important to me. And I think it's really important that the constituencies are well served. We have a parliamentary democracy, that's an important thing. But the other side to it is what it does to your life. And, I quite like being able to see my friends and, have a normal life. And I think watching Jo close up do it,
and she's got 2 young children.
She's got 2 young children. It's an incredibly demanding job. It doesn't just affect you. It affects your family and it affects your friends. And so I'm closer to it than I was before, but I have not made a decision. And I will let you know first, I'm sure, Iain, when I do.
I'll hold you to that. Consequences if you don't.
Oh dear, oh dear. I've just promised an exclusive live on air, haven't I?
But do you, you have, yes. Are you somebody that likes to be liked? Does criticism, insults really affect you?
You cannot please everybody. And in fact, you become both, the great hope, but also the great reason why everything went wrong. And if you want to look at, Jo Swinson in the last election, people are being very critical outside of the Lib Dems of her. And actually, I'm not sure that's fair.
The thing that really gets to you.
That is the kind of thing that I am. It does get to me. Of course, it gets to you. And as you say, I think you'd be an odd person, I think, if it didn't get to you. And the question you have to ask is it something that you're happy to have in your life? And I think, actually, the honest answer to that is I'm fine with it. I'm a big girl. I can take it. That's fine. The question that I am still umming and ahhing over is not that, but it's when it starts to affect people around you and when they start getting that level of critique. And that's the bit that actually I need to have the conversations with them, because you do a job like that not on your own. You're supported by your family, your colleagues and everything else. And if you can't, in all good conscience, do that job knowing how it's going to affect them, then you shouldn't do it.
Well, let's talk about your slight revelation a couple of weeks ago,
Yes.
Which safe to say you could have knocked me down with a feather. You I don't know, was it Pink News or the Daily Mail that you did an interview with? And
it was both, yeah.
You talked about a new relationship with a woman, and you described yourself as a pansexual, which was something that I'd never heard of before. Just explain to our listeners how you define that.
How I define that. And I think, first of all, to put it kind of into context, I'd identified as straight for almost all of my adult life. I'd always had boyfriends before and found myself in a position where I was in a relationship with a woman, a wonderful woman. And it really made me question everything. You question your whole identity. Am I somehow hiding something that I didn't know about? That kind of thing. And I realised, actually, no, it's because it's the person that I'm attracted to. And their physical attributes, male, female, other, doesn't matter to me. It's how you click and how you get on in their personality. And I realised that at some point I was going to talk about this, probably. So you go on, as you do when you're sort of having these moments of, gosh, this is a new facet to me that I didn't know about. And you look at these different definitions online. And pansexual was the one that seemed to resonate most with me, which is that it's an attraction to the person regardless of anything else.
Because a lot of people would say, well, actually, it's bisexual. What's the difference between being a bisexual and a pansexual?
Well, I suppose it's just recognising, first of all, the fact that the gender aspect of it to me is not that important. And there are people who are gender non-conformist, they're, perhaps intersex, there could be, it doesn't really matter to me, that stuff. And it opens the door to, well, it's a woman, but maybe it's another gender, it doesn't really matter. So it's a more sort of all-encompassing, inclusive definition. But yeah, I think when I first did it, and when I first spoke to, let's say, my mother about it, I would describe it as that. It's that I'm in a relationship with a woman and I'm bisexual. And then as I realised that didn't roll off the tongue, it just didn't feel right, it wasn't the right term for me, then I discovered this other term. And actually, when I say that, I feel more comfortable with it.
And how did that conversation go?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one. I mean, when your mum and you actually spend your whole life talking about when you're going to meet Prince Charming and have the wedding and have all the kids. And actually her first reaction was, well, does this mean you can't have kids? It's like, well, no, actually. One of the reasons why I'm with this woman is because she does want to have kids one day and have a family. And actually, the last person I was with didn't. And that was the deal breaker for the relationship. So no, but you have to have those conversations. And in the end, every single member of my family has been, and beyond actually, has been so supportive and just absolutely lovely. And the visibility of it, I think, has helped some people. I've been contacted by people who have had, said, thank you for saying this, thank you for raising this word in society. People didn't know what it was. I had a couple of MPs come up to me going, God, I've had emails of, people from places far-flung in the UK. He's like, what is this? Let's have a conversation about it. What does it mean? And that's not a bad thing, surely.
But then you will have had other people, like I've got a text here from Brian in Gloucester who says, I'd be grateful if you would please ask Layla Moran to keep her sexual preferences to herself.
Right. He's right. So actually the reason why this happened, and he's in your job, what does it matter? This has no impact at all on me being an MP at all. And the reason why I felt I had to do it, and it probably would have been, at some point come out that by the conversation, as you know, Iain, I don't shy away from talking about my private life. It comes up. But the reason why I had to do it this week was because there was a newspaper that was threatening to out me. And they had actually started asking questions as early as mid-October, months and months and months ago.
And this was a Mail on Sunday.
Mail on Sunday, who have owned up to the fact that they were going to do this. And I just don't think it's relevant.
What would that have been their public interest reason? Because nowadays you can't, it's not like 1995 when the News of the World would have something like this on their front page every day as sort of prurience. They have to have a public interest justification.
I don't know. They, especially in mid-October, I mean, they were talking about the fact that you might run for leadership. Well, I haven't said I am. They're like, well, you might. I was like, okay, but I'm not. There isn't even a contest yet. And in mid-October, Jo Swinson was in place and it was before an election. So I don't understand why, even as far back as then, and the fact is they found it salacious and they wanted to talk about it. And I hope that the reaction has made them realise that this isn't something that is right. And I have to say, Iain, the vast majority of journalists who I have spoken to about this don't see the public interest in it, think it's nobody's business. And the reason why I spoke out about it, and the caller is absolutely right, it shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't be something we're talking about. People care about more interesting things than this, frankly. But if someone's going to be telling my personal story, I think that person should be me.
The other thing, it slightly blows a hole in the argument that I always put forward, is that you are born gay.
Yeah.
And yeah. I knew from the age of, 6, 7, 8 that I was different, that I just knew. May not have been able to identify it in those terms at that age, but very quickly I could. Are you telling us that you've never even thought about being with a woman?
Maybe, and I've said this before, maybe at school, and it wasn't anything I'd acted on. It was just maybe I am, because everyone at that age is kind of working it out, and you learn that some of your friends are gay, and you're thinking, is that something I am too? Don't know. And I've got a gay brother and a gay sister, and like it's not something that so I've thought about it, around it. I love it. It's great. Who cares? And yeah, it does kind of blow a hole in, and it makes you think, like, was this something that was always there and I just didn't know? Who cares? I mean, the fact is, I'm in a nice relationship now. That's great. people have found out about it because I was kind of forced to talk about it. But let's have a conversation about the wider issues around equality, that in this day and age, this shouldn't be a news story, and that's kind of the story.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I invited you to come on the programme. I mean, it was supposed to be earlier in the week, but you had to do some parliamentary votes. And because I do think it is quite interesting when you haven't coined a new phrase, but you've coined a new phrase. I mean, I hadn't heard of it, and I think the majority of my listeners won't have heard of it. So I was quite keen to explore it from that point of view, and I think you've explained that very well. Well, we'll come to questions in a moment from our listeners. If you'd like to ask Layla Moran about anything at all, well, I say anything, you know what I mean. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's coming up to 8:30. Serena Farrow has the news headlines.
US officials say it's highly likely an Iranian anti-aircraft missile brought down a Ukrainian passenger plane. 176 people on board the Boeing 737, including 3 British passengers, were killed when it came down in Tehran. County Terror Police have been called to investigate an attack at a maximum security prison in Cambridgeshire. 5 staff members at HMP Whitemoor needed hospital treatment, though staff say it was quickly resolved. And it's understood the Queen, Prince Charles and Prince William have ordered their teams to find a workable solution over the future role of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It follows the couple's announcement they will be stepping back as senior royals. LBC weather: clear spells across Scotland and northern England, heavy rain elsewhere though, particularly in southern parts of England and Wales, a low of -2 degrees.
This is LBC.
January is tough enough without a broken boiler. Keep your home warm and working this winter with 2 years interest-free credit and your boiler installed by one of our expert engineers. Plus, you'll get a 5-year British Gas warranty, and we can even quote by video call after work or on weekends. Get a quote by the 29th of February, and you can also get £200 off a new boiler, or £400 off for our existing home care customers. Search British Gas New Boiler. Conditions apply.
Ladies and gentlemen, behold the world's most fantastical, sensational number. 70 million! This Friday's Euro Millions jackpot is a massive £70 million!
Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Estimated jackpot. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
We've got something to tell you about the Honda Jazz. We know it looks small, but inside, it's really big. That's why we've created the small but big Jazz event, where you can get 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing on all grades until the 31st of January. The Honda Jazz, the small car with the big offer. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
For specialist advice on smart technology to help cut heating bills, visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
People tell me I've got a baby face. My secret? Stay active. Do what you love. Personally, I love music and drinking tea. I do love my English tea. It kept me warm when I was sleeping rough.
City Hall has doubled its outreach workers. You can help people like John too. Search StreetLink London to connect a rough sleeper to the Mayor's new rapid response team. Whatever the weather, homeless people deserve better.
Iain Dale on LBC.
8:32, Layla Moran is here, the Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon. Just before we go to the calls, and if you'd like to talk to Layla or ask her a question, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Just before we go to the calls, you talked about Jeremy Corbyn earlier on, and now he's not going to be there any longer. Do you think your party needs to reevaluate its attitude to the Labour Party, given that they're inevitably going to have somebody as leader who hasn't got the baggage that he's had?
I think you're absolutely right about that. And if I reflect back to 2017, when we unexpectedly took my seat, Oxford West and Abingdon, off the Conservatives, it was because we created a truly progressive alliance of all parties, including Labour Party members and voters, some of whom actually went out and campaigned for me in order to overturn that seat. And this time that happened again, because we have that kind of relationship. It wasn't an official thing at all, but it was a coalition of voters that I'm talking about here. I think the Unite to Remain alliance was a start in the right direction. But because of Brexit and because of Labour's equivocal stance on Brexit, they couldn't be part of it. I think we've got an opportunity now to truly bury the hatchet with the Labour Party. I think with sadness at places like Finchley and Golders Green, where I understand in the last few days of the campaign, they flooded it with Labour Party members to campaign against Luciana, even though it was obvious that she was the contender to the Conservatives in that seat.
Well, that was pure tribal politics.
And that was just tribal politics. And I also, there are other seats where had we maybe put in a bit less effort, that the Labour Party could have won. I understand there are more than 50 seats in this election that could have swung towards either us or the Labour Party. And so you wouldn't have had that landslide 80-seat majority that we have now. It would have been far, far less and far more reflective of the country. I do think as progressive parties, we need to find a way of working together.
But how would you redefine that relationship with the Labour Party? Would you look at, in 2024, at having a formal relationship with them?
I don't think that's... We'll have to see. It really depends.
You wouldn't rule it out?
I wouldn't rule it out. But we'd really, really have to see what that looked like. It would absolutely depend on that new leader. And I think we need to recognise that we have so much more in common. I often say that the end result that we want, and by the way, this equally applies to a degree to Social Democrats who are in the Tory party as well. The end product of what we want for the country is very similar. We want a progressive country that's open-minded and inclusive, but at the same time we want good public services that people can rely on. These are all things that actually most politicians agree on. And the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party actually have much, much more in common than I would say divides us. Certainly when Labour is sort of more centrist and we as a party tack particularly to the centre-left, to that social democratic route that we have. So there is common ground there. Remember, the Liberal Democrats were partly born from originally an offshoot from the Labour Party, and people like Shirley Williams, Roy Jenkins, leading the way, joined with the Liberals and created who we are now. There is common ground between us. I'd love to be able to explore that with them.
Right, let's go to your calls. 0345 6060 973. Graham in Bradford has texted, I like Layla's explanation that you fall in love with the person, not just their sexual attributes. Very enlightening. Maybe that's a light bulb moment for some people. Who knows? Jerry is in Burton-on-Trent. Hello, Jerry.
Hi there, Ian, and thanks for working so hard during this election period. I've been enjoying all your programmes where you've featured, and you've been doing a splendid job.
I agree with you, Jerry.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you.
First class. And as a former North Norfolk constituent, I must say you did a splendid job when you were out canvassing. You did a superb blog and kept us all up to date with what was going on.
Didn't work though, did it?
Yeah, but you were formidably matched against Norman, but otherwise I think you'd have sailed through.
Well, it's wrong timing because, of course, that seat has turned Tory with a 14,000 majority.
Yeah.
If you'd have hung on in there, Ian.
Typical. Always the wrong place at the wrong time, me. Anyway, Jerry, what would you like to ask Layla?
Hi, Layla.
Hi, Jerry.
Layla, I'm a former Lib Demmer, and I'm one of the old original SDP types, if you like. And I've always been for Europe, but I've not liked the way it's gone. And I felt very alienated with the way the party's changed, in the sense that Ed Davey and various others have said, well, it's about reform, it's about change and all that kind of thing. But I think that a lot of people, and certainly I'm one of them, being a strong Brexiteer, has said, well, what about the fact that our voices really didn't seem to count? And when you toned it down to people's vote, which really irritated me, because it's either a referendum or, if you want to call it something else, then define the difference. But people's vote was a lame way, I think, of trying to resell a way of going back on the term of a referendum. And so I think that brings into question the term, is an MP a delegate or a representative? And so many MPs were saying, no, once you've elected us, we decide what's best for you. Once we're in, that's it. So there's less listening and less understanding, and very little was said when challenged about other than they didn't know what they were voting for. And so we were lost in that sort of vacuum of thinking, well, we must be in the minority, even though we ran the referendum because of all the reasons given.
Yeah.
So my question is really, as an MP, it seems a fine balance between a lot of the MPs that succeeded as in favour of Brexit have said we've listened to people and we're carrying out the people's instructions. Those that had the opposite view, like yourselves, were in effect saying, irrespective of what they say, we're stuck in our ways. No mention of how to reform. I mean, no matter what was done with the EU, they weren't going to bend on anything. And it's just become even more federal. So that's how I felt, and I just felt...
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get an answer from Layla.
So thank you, Jerry, for your question. And in fact, I would say, you are exactly the kind of voter that I think the Liberal Democrats now need to look to win back and to win back your trust after what has been, I think, and it's going to continue to be, I'm afraid, quite a painful time for our country, because whilst the withdrawal agreement's now through the Commons, we've still got the political negotiation, the declaration, the trade deal that's still to come. We've got a extensionless cliff edge at the end, and hopefully we will land on a deal. I really hope so, but I worry that some of that may not come. And the thing that I'm concerned about, first of all, your point about we lost you, I think that's probably a fair criticism. If Brexit was the main thing that you were voting on, the Liberal Democrats were pretty clear and unequivocal about our position. We said we don't want this. In my own seat, I feel like my values, my mandate, and also the values of my party were all aligned. But I know that, in other parts of the country that wasn't the case. And I think that maybe this is why we thought, the referendum was the way of bringing people back together, because it would allow people to decide if the direction that Brexit was going to take them was the way that they actually wanted to go. And it sounds very much like, you still want that. And I still don't. The big question, I think, for the whole country is how do we recover from this now?
But do you accept that, Brexit is going to happen now, isn't it? I think everyone accepts
Absolutely.
that.
No, that would be utterly stupid for me to say.
But in terms of now, people who believe that we are better off inside the EU, they're not suddenly going to change their minds on
exactly.
that. So when do you think is a decent interval before a rejoin campaign should start? Because a lot of people would say, this was a once-in-a-generation vote. If the Liberal Democrats said, look, we still believe that we're better off in Europe, but we understand that we've made the decision now, and we believe that certainly not before maybe 3 general elections time. We're not going to have a policy of rejoining, because we think that wouldn't actually get the support of the British people. Because if you look at the mechanics of actually doing that, it's pretty difficult in some ways.
It would be. And I mean, I think that the immediate battles actually we have to fight now is we accept that, the withdrawal agreement's now passed. It's happening. On the 31st of January, I think I'm going to be in a quiet corner somewhere with a glass of whiskey. It's not going to be a celebratory time for me and Big Ben ringing and fireworks going off and all the rest of it. I'll probably not be a very happy woman. But actually, the big battle in front of us now is how do we make this work for the country? How do we make this work for everybody? For me, that's closest possible alignment. That's what we're going to push for. I'm worried about some aspects of the way Boris Johnson says he wants the future trading relationship to go. I think we need to be maintaining things like level playing field standards on environmental protections, particularly. So these are the things that we now need to...
And that's a perfectly legitimate argument to have.
Yeah, and then one day...
If you were leader of the Liberal Democrats, I mean, just imagine that for a second. Just imagine that. Would you want to lead your party into the 2024 election with a promise to rejoin the EU, or do you think that would be too early?
I think we're going to have to wait and see what that looks like. And I say that because this is actually going to be quite a tumultuous year. We're assuming that we are going to end up with a deal. Now, yes, we have a next phase to come, but there's still a big negotiation to do. We have a cliff edge at the end of next year by which this has to be done.
Well, the cliff edge is actually in July.
Oh, that's
right.
Actually,
that's when they have to decide whether there's going to be an extension.
That's right.
And I'm assuming that the government is not going to ask for that.
They absolutely ruled out an extension.
The most likely outcome, I think, at the end of the year is for a skeleton deal to be done in some sectors, in the main sectors, maybe with all the difficult stuff maybe shoved off to the future. I think that's the most likely thing.
I think the most important thing now is whatever position we take actually allows for options. I wouldn't rule out rejoining, absolutely not. But I think we need to see where the circumstances lead us. The other thing that's on the horizon that worries me actually is not anything to do with Brexit, but there is a potential for some kind of future financial crash. It's been 10 years since the last one. We know that there are some worrying signals coming out, particularly of the American markets. And if something like that happens at a time of increasing uncertainty in Britain, if people wanted it, they should be able to have that option. But I suspect of rejoining if that's what they wanted to do. But these are all ifs and buts.
I'm not sure that would be a particularly...
No, but it would have to be the people who wanted it. And I think it would have to be
But to say, well, if there's a financial crash, that's when we should rejoin, I'm not sure that's going to be a particularly appealing selling point to people.
Well, people may well find that they would rather be in the bigger ship at that point than on their own. And I think right now, however, we need to be focusing on
this. That's the least convincing argument you've put forward in 45 minutes, if I may say so. Listen, we want to get to some other calls. We just got to go to a quick short break here, and then we'll be going to Keith in Aberporth in South Wales. Jerry, thank you for your call. It's 8:45.
Back for its third year.
And the winner is...
the Global Awards 2020. LBC and its sister stations are joining together to bring you an unforgettable awards night.
Show your appreciation for LBC's Mr. Steve Allen.
The Global Awards 2020 with very.co.uk, rewarding the very best from the world of music, news and entertainment. But who will win this time? Vote now. Download the Global Player app or have your say at lbc.co.uk. The Global Awards 2020.
With very.co.uk. Get more out of every day.
LBC.
Here's the thing about block management. If you do it yourself,
you're over here sorting out the insurance. And here, keeping everything compliant.
Don't forget the grounds maintenance and the service charges.
And that's just what you need to do today. But because the ABC Estates block management team can look after every aspect of your property portfolio, from repairs to service charge collections, your time can, at last, be better spent elsewhere. Be as happy as Larry with block management from Aldermartin, Baines and Cuthbert. Talk to us today. Call 0800 888 6688 or visit abcestates.co.uk.
Marooned in deep space and no sign of help? Don't panic. And with the AA, the app lets you track the mechanic right to your side. I'm thinking of joining the AA. I don't think they accept cats as members. Who said anything about being a member? I want one of those shiny yellow jackets. Ow!
There are lots of smart reasons to join the AA. You'll get unlimited call-outs, our tap and track app, and we'll get you going again in around 30 minutes of arrival. Switch to a different kind of breakdown service from just £6 a month. Visit theaa.com. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
Clearance at John Lewis & Partners is now on, with up to 50% off selected lines across all your favourite brands. So if you've had your eye on something special, now's the time to make it yours. More of what you love for less. Clearance, now on. Terms and conditions apply. See in-store or online for details.
Driving in London can be tough. I know. I drive for a living. But there's good news. Ola, the global ride-hailing app, is starting operations in London this January. My friends in Birmingham say it's a company that cares for its drivers. I'm excited about the 0% commission offer they're running all through this January and February. Oh, and you also get payments next working day, straight to your account. I've already signed up at olaride.uk, and I'm looking forward to earning more every day with Ola. When are you signing up?
Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:47. Let's go to Keith in Aberporth in South Wales. Keith, what's your question, please?
Hello, Ian. Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to say I'm very glad to hear that. Is it Laura?
Layla.
Layla has realigned herself with democracy again. As for me, I should be partying like it's the year 2000. On the
Party
31st.
like it's 1999.
Is it 1999?
It's 1999, yeah.
That we raised a glass.
Well, it was, but the song that you're referring to.
Song, yeah, that's right. But the question I wanted to ask, and I told your researcher, was what does Layla think about the recent announcement by the Sussexes? And the ramifications the constitutional ramifications or whatever for the royal family.
Okay, well, let's get her views. Layla, do you have strong views on this?
Well, I really don't. I'm sorry, Keith, if you've been following this assiduously. I've been watching this going, I kind of don't really, it doesn't really bother me too much what they decide to do with their lives. The bit that makes me sad, though, was it became a story because it was clear they didn't tell the rest of their family. And it's kind of like a family business, albeit a very rich family
business.
business.
When the Queen is 93 years old, the least you could do is actually tell her. The least you could do is give
her a heads up. Yeah. And I have to say that with that, I've got a bit of sympathy for the family, because if one of my siblings did that to me, I'd be pretty angry. But I wish them well, and I don't really know, and I don't think anyone really knows what this now means. Does this mean that they're going to... I don't understand how they can say they want to be financially independent, and yet also want to live in, estates that are paid for by the Queen's estate and the taxpayer, and all of that stuff I think needs sorting out. So I wonder how much of it was thought through.
Do you have any sympathy with the argument that they've been driven out partly because parts of the media have highlighted on Meghan's mixed race background, which, I mean, I said last night, I didn't even know she was mixed race until someone told me. It's a bit like when somebody told me that you were the first mixed race MP,
well, exactly.
because you're half Palestinian.
Yeah.
Really? I didn't. Yeah. I mean, it just didn't. Do you think there's anything in that?
Well, she, I think, was quite expressive about how difficult she found that in that documentary that they did, and so we have to assume that she's not lying. That will have been, I'm sure, part of it, and also they as a couple have, in statements and so forth, talked about how they've felt hounded by elements of the press, who, again, I suspect are probably not representative of most journalists, but feel that this kind of stuff sells newspapers and that's what they're going to do. And if that's part of the reason, I think that's really regrettable, don't you think? She mentioned, I remember in the documentary, that her friends in America who were English had warned her that this was a facet of our society. And she said, surely not. And then she got here and it was. And I have to say, I've had a little bit of experience of this now over the last couple of weeks myself, and a few months myself. And I don't think it represents the best of our society. I think most people don't think these things are stories. I think she clearly did experience some racism. I also saw a horrible advert on Twitter today where someone had said that, she was pussy whipping him. And it was a picture of her with her leg on his back with... it was just disgusting what people are saying about it. And yeah, I'm sure that will have played into part of her decision. And I think that's really sad.
Right. Keith, thank you very much. Ben is a new caller on Dartmoor. I say on Dartmoor, as I assume you're not in Dartmoor, Ben.
No, I'm in Dartmoor, in just above Bobby Tracy. Wonderful place to be.
No, I meant you weren't in the prison.
Oh, no, yes, no, thankfully not.
I was imagining that he was on a rocky outcrop somewhere.
Yeah.
Right, what's your question?
So my question's looking back at the coalition years.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I find it really interesting. I actually, I find it, especially when looking at, so I study politics, and I think it's actually a huge example, and it's unbiased, but I find it a huge example of how the Liberal Democrats actually, actually put country before party, and actually beyond that, showed British politics how to grow up. And so I was wondering what your opinion was on the coalition years, and if you found yourself in that situation ever, what would you do the same, and what would you do differently?
Well, I was a party member in 2010 when this happened. I'd stood in the seat of Battersea and had no expectation of winning at all, despite the massive...
Which was just as well.
Which was just as well, because I really didn't. Slightly increased my vote share, and I was proud of that. But then we had a special conference where we voted on whether or not we should go into coalition or not. And the context of it was, financial crash. We felt very much that this was what the country had asked us to do. We also, are proponents of electoral reform. And one of the consequences in other countries of having a more proportional system is that coalitions become more likely. Although looking at our first past the post system over the last 10 years, you might not think that, the way that it's delivered hung parliaments. And so we all thought that this was not everybody in the room, but the vast majority of members who went to that special conference voted for it. And that was, so we set off with a pure heart and hope. And I think there were huge mistakes that were made. And the one that made me nearly leave the party was tuition fees. Not because it was necessarily the worst policy. There was a real issue in terms of how do we fund higher education. Some of the universities were saying that they would go under unless we sorted this out. It needed something needed to happen to student finance. But it was the fact that we'd signed a pledge to say that we wouldn't touch fees. And yet that's what happened. And when you lose trust with the electorate, that actually, as a party member, made me, I nearly sent that email of resignation.
And what did you think when Nick Clegg did his apology? Remember that sorry video?
I do, and it was turned into a song,
yes.
which I
played a little bit of that on the programme the other day when the Liberal Democrats wouldn't provide us with a guest.
Oh, really? Oh, I wasn't told that. I would have always stepped into the breach for you. But no, it was absolutely the right thing to do, and I think we should have apologised sooner. I think it was terrible politics.
But what about this sort of hair-shirt approach that many Liberal Democrats now adopt with the coalition? It's a bit like the Iraq War in Labour. If you supported the Iraq War, you're a non-person.
Yeah.
You can't find a Liberal Democrat to say a good word about the coalition, and yet the coalition implemented 75% of your manifesto promises in 2010.
Well,
so what would not be to like there?
Yeah, it's mixed feelings about it, right? So on the one hand, yes, very proud of particularly things that we managed to do in the Green Investment Bank, for example, that kind of thing, that were policy agendas that then, frankly, weren't that sexy. And now, in this last election, actually, climate change, I think, was, certainly in our case, we were putting it above Brexit as the most important thing. And I dare anyone who's looking at pictures of burning koalas to not agree that this is something that we all need to be tackling now. So there was loads that we did. Pupil premium in education, that's my area. Fantastic policies. But I do think that there were mistakes that were made. And Joe was really clear about this. But in the election itself, it came back to haunt us again. And I think a lot of us were disappointed by that. We thought that we'd got through that period and that actually we need to now look to the future. I think there are still questions that we need to ask about that, but also where do we go from here and how do we ensure that people know who we stand for as Liberal Democrats on our own 2 feet. And that's the challenge for the party moving forward.
Well, Ben, if you're a big student of the coalition, I hope you've read David Law's book on the coalition.
I have, actually, and
which I had the great pleasure of publishing.
Great, but, no, I have.
Did you?
And he wrote a very good diary of the time, which I published also, which, as I'm no longer with a publishing company, I can plug because I have no financial benefit to gain from it. Ben, good call. Thank you very much. Cornelius is in Swansea. What's your question, Cornelius?
Good evening to you all.
Hi.
I've been listening to the programme this evening, and I've been listening to the lady there, and it came over to me that she still doesn't accept the general election result, the results of a referendum, and still I personally think, they would still try to oppose any deal or make it difficult for Boris Johnson to bring back any deal to Parliament.
She's nodding her head.
I will oppose his deal. I voted against it today. Absolutely. We are the opposition.
Why are you doing that?
Because we are the opposition. There is in our constitution, you've got the government that puts things forward. In this case, it's the withdrawal agreement. And then the opposition parties. And by the way, as a Liberal Democrat, I stood on that mandate and I massively increased my own majority, and we increased our vote share by 4% across the country. We have been absolutely clear about what we stand for, and it's not something that I want, and I'm going to vote against it. Absolutely right.
Sorry, but surely you should accept democracy and accept the will of the people and to leave, and be behind the United Kingdom, making sure knowing that we're going to be leaving, get the best deal for this country.
So we are doing
that. How do you still keep opposing leaving the EU after the length of time this has gone on? Had to have another general election because Parliament was blocked, and yet you still rabbited on about staying in the EU.
So
if you are so entrenched in the EU, why don't you just go and get a job with the EU? Clear off. The country have listened to people like you for 3.5 years, and you're still talking about it.
We are still talking about it.
The biggest smile that went on my face during this general election was Joe Swinton losing a seat.
Well, listen, Cornelius,
if everyone of that woman is a joke.
If everyone in this country, if the winner takes all, and then you suddenly have all MPs all voting the same way all the time, that's not a parliamentary democracy, that's a dictatorship.
But you could have voted for the second reading of the Brexit bill, the in-principle vote. You could have all voted for that and then voted against the amendments, maybe voted against third reading. I think people would have understood, well, at least they recognise that we are leaving.
We do. I mean, look, the parliamentary maths is what it is. And I hope from those who have heard me today, actually, is an understanding of where we are now. I do believe, though, that you don't necessarily, go along with just everything, making the best legislative decisions. We spoke earlier about how do we make decisions? How do you make good decisions? And one of the reasons we have our parliamentary democracy with the opposition is to be that person in the room saying, well, that's what you want to do. Actually, you shouldn't do it because of X, Y, and Z. And good decisions are made when all of those points of view are in the room. And that is what we are doing. We are presenting that opposition, that opposing point of view. And by the way, we have a mandate to do that.
Cornelius, thank you very much for your very spirited call. Leon in Rochester, who's a Brexiteer, says, I know nothing about your guest MP, but I turned on 5 minutes ago and I'm already a fan.
Oh, well,
See,
thank
so
you
can win some Brexiteers around, even if Cornelius is never likely to vote for you.
He might not vote for us, but I'm appreciative of the call.
Well, Layla, we appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you very
That's
much.
Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon. Well, we were going to talk about Labour leadership in the next hour, but we've made an executive decision not to, even though we did a Twitter poll earlier to decide which subject to do. The reason is that the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has this evening said that all evidence suggests an Iranian missile brought down the Ukrainian passenger plane that crashed near Tehran. If this turns out to be true, what will it mean for Western relations with the Middle East, and how should we respond to it? How should Canada respond? 63 Canadians were killed in that crash. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Canada's Prime Minister says intelligence now suggests technical problems weren't to blame for a plane crashing in Iran yesterday, killing 176 people.
The evidence indicates that the plane was shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile. This may well have been unintentional.
Well, 4 British passengers were also killed when it came down in Tehran.